The real reason Drew Brees never won an MVP, so one of the great mysteries in life, how the hell did Saints legend, the living legend, the greatest slider restaurant owner of all time, Drew Brees, how did he never ever win an MVP? It's a great question. We will watch this video, react, and see if we can figure it out. How the hell did this guy never get an MVP?
2006, 2009, 2011, and 2018. The 4 years where Drew Brees was named a finalist for the MVP trophy, and also the 4 years where he came in second place. Surprisingly, Drew Brees, one of the best quarterbacks of all time, has never won an MVP trophy. Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, and Drew Brees all played in the same era, and all of them dominated and broke tons of records.
Now that is a problem. The real answer here, well, it's like a three-part answer, but the real answer is that Brees played with some of the most powerful, narrative-driven quarterbacks ever. Like, think about the narrative, the media machine, how much the NFL and ESPN and Fox Sports and whoever else, how much they love Peyton Manning, how much they love Tom Brady, how much, back then, they loved Aaron Rodgers. Back then, MVP, really sports in general, but certainly voter awards, were way more of like a class favorite kind of thing than now. Now that there's legalized betting and people are betting on MVP and betting on Defensive Player of the Year and betting on all of that, statistics, analytics, and like who actually should win is way more in the forefront of people's minds. Back then, it was like, should this player actually be given the award? Probably, but Peyton Manning's kind of funny, so let's give it to Peyton Manning. And it was cool. Like, that was just it. No one really cared. No one really batted an eye. But now it's much more front and center. Like, I mean, I had Victor Wembanyama to win Defensive Player of the Year on a huge ticket. It was like 40-1. And I listened to a lot of sports betting podcasts. The analytics that were coming out against Rudy Gobert, it was like, how can anyone vote for Rudy Gobert? How can they vote for him? But then you listen to the voters and you see who the voters are, and you know, honestly, it's people who probably shouldn't have a vote. I mean, when I worked for the newspaper as a crime reporter, I sat in front of a guy who had a Heisman vote. Should he have had a Heisman vote just because he was a sports reporter for a newspaper? Probably not. You know, like, he probably wasn't watching every college football game. He certainly wasn't watching like Pac-12 games. He was an SEC guy through and through, and he probably voted for an SEC player every single year, for the Heisman. But so voter awards are kind of weird. I think if it was nowadays, I think Brees would have gotten MVP because his stats at certain times, I'm sure they'll see it in this video, his stats definitely, he was the best he was the best player, the best quarterback in the NFL at the time, but he just didn't have that strong of a narrative behind him. And New Orleans in the NFC South has been one of those divisions and teams that for a long time was just completely forgot about in the media landscape.
There's only one word that comes to mind: greatness.
Those four set an absurd standard that just cannot be replicated nowadays. But among those four legendary quarterbacks, Drew Brees is the only one without an MVP to his name. Brees has been a finalist for MVP 4 times in his career and has never won it, which is actually a record in the NFL. The reason that Brees never won any MVP trophies is, at its core, because of extremely bad timing. But there's also some other factors that came into play. Factors like the MVP award meaning something different every single year. But even then, I believe there's one season that Brees had a really strong case for winning this prestigious trophy. Let's take a look back at all 4 of Drew Brees' MVP worthy.
You know what's crazy about Brees? Like, if you just look at the numbers and you just look at the body of work, you could really make an argument that he's the second greatest quarterback to ever live. Obviously, Tom Brady's the first, but you could really make an argument that he had a better career than Peyton Manning, or he had a better career than, whatever quarterback you want to name. And yeah, the fact that he's never won an MVP is pretty wild.
Seasons and find out exactly why he didn't win a single one. 2005. New Orleans had just been hit by a Category 5 hurricane named Katrina.
Got absolutely boom roasted. At the time, I was living in Biloxi, Mississippi, which also got absolutely roasted by Katrina. Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, which is in between New Orleans and Biloxi, I believe is where Katrina hit the hardest. I think that's what the the weather science or whatever says. But Biloxi got smoked. It was crazy and absolutely insane time to be alive, certainly to be alive in that area. The house that I grew up in, the house I was living in at the time, got like 12 feet of water. We left the day before Katrina, and I never walked back in that house. I mean, it was like, it completely changed everything. Wild to see, wild to think about, but I was, 14, 15 at the time? No, 16. 2005? Yeah, I just turned 16.
Everything had been destroyed, and everywhere it was filled with water. The Superdome, the Saints Stadium, was still standing. However, it would be impossible to play in its horrible condition. As a result, in 2005, the New Orleans Saints would be forced to play home games in other places, like LSU's Tiger Stadium, the Alamo Dome in San Antonio, and even at the Giants Stadium. Home field advantage really did not exist for this team, and with everything going on, it really is not surprising that they ended the 2005 season with a record of 3-13.
It's crazy to think about how much of a disadvantage that is. Like nowadays, that would never happen. Like now they would never tell a team to go to all these different places, play all these games. They would do something else. But like the Superdome after Katrina was like a refuge area. Like people, it was like they would take people whose houses were destroyed and they had nowhere else to go, and they would seek refuge in the Superdome. They would live in the Superdome. Like that was a place they just put people in there until they could shuttle them out to Houston or somewhere else and get things figured out. But it's crazy what the Superdome was, what New Orleans was in 2005, and then what it would be in 2006, and then moving forward.
It wouldn't be until the 2006 season that the New Orleans Saints would return home again, but this time they were different. The Saints had hired Sean Payton, an unproven assistant coach from the Cowboys, as their head coach. They also took a gamble in signing a quarterback that had a rough
Drew Brees. A little Drew Brees fun fact. Brees was supposed to go to the Dolphins. Nick Saban was the coach at the time. Brees had the shoulder issue. I think it was either Saban wanted him and the medical team wouldn't clear him, and so the Dolphins passed on him. It was either that or the opposite. It was either the medical team cleared him, but Saban didn't want him. But Miami passed. But he was going to Miami. They passed on Brees. Because they passed on Brees, the Saints got him. But if it wasn't for that, think about how different the world would be, or the sports world would be. If Nick Saban gets Drew Brees in Miami, who the hell knows what could have happened? Like, Saban could still be an NFL coach. He may have never went back to Alabama. Drew Brees, who knows if he would have had the same career if he's not with Sean Payton. Like, that one decision, the domino effect of what could have happened is huge. Like, does Alabama go on the run in college football? Does that, everything is different.
Start with the Chargers, a quarterback that was also coming off a horrible shoulder injury that many doctors said wouldn't allow him to throw a football ever again. But the Saints front office, Sean Payton, and the fans really believed that the young Drew Brees could be their guy.
In every community, you find that there's a lot of areas that need help or that sort of thing. So we're just going to kind of see where we're needed.
And what a testament to Drew Brees too. He always talks about when he had a meeting or interview or whatever in New Orleans, like the drive from the airport. He said like the windows on the limo were like really dark. And he thought at the time it was because they didn't want anyone to know who was in the limo. But really, they didn't want him looking out. Like, he's looking into a completely destroyed, desolate area. Like, imagine being Drew Brees. You're coming from San Diego, and you touch down in New Orleans a year after the worst natural disaster in U.S. history, and you're looking around like, I don't know, man. I don't know if I should move my family here. Like, there's nothing. It's just destroyed. Like that's got to be a pretty hard sell too. But I guess at that time he was desperate to get a starting job and just go where he had to go.
2006 season was truly a special one. The Saints started the season winning the first 3 games, including blowing out their rivals, the Falcons, in the home opener, and creating one of the best moments in Saints history.
Yeah. Which now is immortalized in a statue outside the Superdome.
The Saints ended the season with a 10-6 record, and Drew Brees had himself a pretty good first year, throwing for 4,400 yards, 26 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, and also completing 64.3% of his passes. Drew's performance this season was recognized as he made the Pro Bowl and even made first team All-Pro.
It is kind of funny, but those numbers are pretty close to what Derek Carr did in his first year. Like, would Carr have 25 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, 3,800 yards? Team went 9-8. It is kind of funny. I mean, I'm not saying they're anything close to each other, but it shows you how perception can change a year. Like, them going from 3-13 to 10-6 means Brees' numbers were sweet. He was the man. He was the greatest. Carr's numbers are looked at as a bad year because 9-8 didn't make the playoffs. The team was not fun to watch. So it's crazy how narratives and perception can really alter how you view a season or a statistical, like a stat line or anything like that.
The first and last time this happened in his career. But more importantly, Drew Brees was voted a finalist for the MVP trophy. Although his stats weren't the best for quarterbacks that season, the impact he had on the team was glaring. The year prior, in 2005, the Saints had a record of 3-13. In just one season, they completely turned it around. It was obvious that Drew Brees made a massive difference and was a crucial part to
went to the NFC title game.
The Saints' success. Unfortunately for Brees, running back LaDainian Tomlinson, his former teammate, also happened to have a historic year. With 1,800 rushing yards, 500 receiving yards, and 33 touchdowns. He scored 33 touchdowns as a running back. There was never a chance.
Different time. Man, LaDainian Tomlinson was sweet. LaDainian Tomlinson changed fantasy football. He really did. Like, he was one of those guys that he completely changed fantasy football and how it was looked at, and he kind of created the running back boom of where you wanted the top running back, and like Steven Jackson was right after him, and it continued that. And so yeah, Brees wasn't winning the MVP this year.
That Brees was gonna win MVP that year, but he did have a really good chance at winning it 3 years later. The 2009 season was no doubt the best season in Saints history. The Saints ended the season with a record of 13-3, clinching the first seed in the NFC, and Drew Brees was fantastic this year. It was probably the best season in his career up to that point. Brees threw for almost 4,400 yards on a 70% completion rate, and also threw for 34 touchdowns and 11 interceptions.
So this is what you got to think about with the Saints at this time. Up until this point, the Saints had been a complete nothing in the NFL. From 1967, their first year, to 2006, they were a non-factor. They were not good. They were not relevant as far as like a contender or a playoff team or a championship team. And being in New Orleans and being in the NFC South or the NFC West, which they were in at a certain time, no one cared about them, right? Like it was just a team that people just, didn't focus on. This is when all of a sudden people are like, wait, what the hell's going on here? What is this? Who is this team? Who is Drew Brees? Who is Sean Payton? Like I was saying to start the video, a voter award, it does matter who the voters are watching. If 100% of your voters are in New York, this is just a hypothetical, but if 100% of your voters are in New York and the competition is between, a New York Yankees player or an Arizona Diamondbacks player for MVP, the Yankees player is going to win because the voters are in New York. That's just how it works. And that is a problem with voter awards. So if the voters aren't watching you, it's hard to win. Up until this point here, that's where the New Orleans Saints were. And even after winning the Super Bowl, I think they still had to kind of fight for some relevancy.
The only accolade that Drew Brees got this season was being named to the Pro Bowl. He was named a finalist for the MVP trophy, but Peyton Manning ended up winning the award. This award could have honestly gone either way. Manning and Brees had similar seasons, but I believe that Drew Brees had the edge over Peyton Manning. Let's take a look at their cases for MVP. The first thing that voters look at is who had the better record in stats. The Saints had a record of 13-3, but that's because Drew Brees sat out the last game of the season, as they already had clinched the first seed. So in reality, Drew's record was actually 13-2. On the other hand, Peyton Manning had played all 16 games, even after clinching the first seed after game 14. So Manning's record was 14-2. Individually, Drew had the superior and more efficient season. Brees did have 100 yards less, but he had more touchdowns, less interceptions, had a better completion rate, had a better passer rating, and a better quarterback rating. Drew Brees.
Yeah, so how the hell did Peyton win this? Well, you look at this, it's like, this is exactly what I'm talking about. He won this award because he's Peyton Manning. And at this point, he is like the darling of the NFL. So everyone's watching his games. Everyone's talking about the Colts. I'm sure the Colts were in prime time nonstop. Like that is how this works. And the MVP, voting, I'm sure back then it's the same as now, it doesn't factor the playoffs in. So you take away the postseason, you take away the Super Bowl and all that stuff, the votes are already in at that point. If the votes would have been after the Super Bowl, Brees probably wins it, but they're before. So that's probably why you're looking at this went this way. So it's ridiculous. I mean, this is a great example of there is absolutely no way you can look at this just right here with nothing else. Just look at the numbers. Look at who the Saints had. Who's Brees throwing to? Who the hell is Peyton Manning throwing to? Peyton Manning has like 3 Hall of Famers on his team at this point. Brees is making a bunch of nobodies, no hate, work. And I mean, if this is today, there's no way Manning would have won because of how in your face analytics and stats are now. But back then, it wasn't the case. It was Peyton Manning is the face of the NFL. Peyton Manning's cool. We like Peyton Manning. He's on commercials. Drew Brees isn't.
Brees was better in almost every metric. Now let's look at the situations of both of these players, because another thing voters take into consideration is who did more with less around him. Peyton Manning had some elite weapons to throw to. He had wide receiver Reggie Wayne, who made the Pro Bowl that year, and tight end Dallas Clark, who made the Pro Bowl and was named first team All-Pro. They both had more than 1,100 yards and 10 touchdowns each. On the other hand, Drew's receivers did not receive any accolades. His main target was wide receiver Marcus Colston, who had 1,000 receiving yards. Brees also had Devery Henderson with 800.
It is crazy. Like Tom Brady's kind of in this world. Brady got way more weapons as time went on, but Brees really, you look at the cast of characters. I mean, Brett Favre is like the guy for never having anyone around him. Like for some reason, the Packers just, he was never given like the superstar receivers or anything like that. Like I know Brady got Moss at the end and Wes Welker and Julian Edelman and guys like that. But Manning had Marvin Harrison, Reggie Wayne, good running backs. So it was Edgar James, Joseph Adai, just pulling these names out. But Brees really did make everyone. Does Marcus Colston have the same career? Does Lance Moore have the same career? Does Pierre Thomas have the same career? Does Devery Henderson have the same career? And the careers they had aren't even that great. Brees really did. Until the end, when Brees had Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara, like, okay, sure. But for the most part, he was really doing some things.
Robert Meacham with 700 and Jeremy Shockey with almost 600 passing yards. But the main thing that really hurt Drew's chances of winning the MVP trophy is the fact that the Saints had a pretty good rushing offense, while Peyton Manning had one of the worst rushing offenses in the entire league. As you
I guarantee you that did not factor in at all.
Probably know, it's pretty hard to have a good passing offense without having a good run game. Drew had the better season and was a better player than Manning, and it wasn't particularly close, but voters thought Manning was more valuable. I wouldn't have a problem with that, as it's literally called the most valuable player.
But see, I don't think that's the case. Like, unfortunately, that is not it. Unfortunately, the voters didn't think Manning was more valuable. The fact of the matter is that the voters just probably watched Peyton more. Probably liked Peyton more. He had more influence, and that was it. I mean, you got to also factor in, like, the voters are reporters, the voters are people in the media, the voters are former coaches or whatever. Sometimes they have a relationship with these players. Sometimes, like, I'm just going to make stuff up here, but if you're an ESPN analyst and you've worked together with Peyton Manning on commercials, or you've worked together on interviews or shows or whatever, you're going to vote for him. And it sounds stupid, but that is how it works with a voter reward. I mean, that is how it works, 100%. So it shouldn't work like that. No doubt, it should not work like that, but it does work like that. And I think they need to get away from the voters, unless the voters are a committee, and that committee is like, they are responsible for the award. So the committee names an award instead of just like votes. And I don't think voters should be anonymous either. It's just a really old way of doing it. And I think it's too it's too volatile for how important these awards are now.
Award, but the thing is, this award has a different meaning every single year. In the 2008 season, Peyton Manning would win the MVP award despite there being 3 quarterbacks that had significantly better seasons. The reason they didn't win is because Drew Brees and Phillip Rivers had 8-8 records, and Kurt Warner had a 9-7 record, while Manning had a 12-4 record. Funny thing is, Rivers and the Chargers still made the playoffs and actually beat Peyton Manning in the wild card. That year, the MVP award just went to the player with the best stats on one of the best teams. Since Brees, Rivers, and Warner didn't have a good enough record, they never had a chance of winning it.
I think the record should matter, but I don't think the record should matter that much.
Even though they were infinitely more valuable and better than Manning that season. So it's crazy that just the very next season, the criteria changes and the award actually goes to the most valuable player this time. So what do you think? What is the MVP award to you? Is it just a glorified
I don't think the MVP award should be the most quote-unquote most valuable player because, one, you could argue that it would never change. Like if Peyton Manning is considered the most valuable player to his team, why would that change year over year? He would be just as valuable like for like a 3-year stretch, right? There was a really good argument for how the award is phrased, and it was the year Peyton Manning got hurt. So, or the year Peyton, I'm trying to think how it played out. I think he got hurt. Whenever Curtis Painter, someone, he either left. Yeah, I think he got hurt. I think that's what happened. I think he had neck surgery or whatever. But when he left Indy, or he didn't play for Indy, and Curtis Painter played, and Indy was the worst team in the NFL, I heard someone say that Peyton Manning should win the MVP. If the MVP really stands for the most valuable player, he should win it. Because by him not being on the team, and the team goes from 15-1 or whatever it was the year before to the worst team in the NFL just because he's not there, that shows how valuable he is. So that can't be it, right? The award can't actually be the most valuable player because that would be ridiculous if a player won the award because he got hurt. Even though by him getting hurt, it proved how valuable he was. See what I'm saying? So the award is who had the best season. That is it. It is who was the best player that season. It is not who's the most valuable. It's not the who's this. It's not who means the most to the team. It's not who won the most games. It's not the quarterback of the number 1 seed. There's none of that. It's just who had the best individual season that year. That is what it should be. Because in basketball, if it's the most valuable player, obviously LeBron James is the most valuable player in the NBA for most of his career, if not all of his career. He's the most important person on any team as far as like value goes. So he should, like, when LeBron was in his prime and Cleveland's the 1 seed, then he leaves and goes to Miami. Cleveland's, the worst team in the NBA. Miami wins the title. That stretch, LeBron should just be the MVP every single year for like 8 years in a row. But you can't do that, right? So it's got to be who had the best individual season. That's how the award should be.
Offensive Player of the Year award, the player with the best stats and a good record award, or is it actually the most valuable player award? 2011, the year where Drew Brees led one of the most dominant offenses, not just in Saints history, but of all time. The Saints offense was putting up an average of 34 points per game, and this offense racked up a total of 7,474 yards, the most in NFL history. They were steamrolling teams in the regular season. This was by far Drew Brees' best season in his entire career, but at the same time, it was also Aaron Rodgers' best. Drew Brees threw for 5,476 yards on a 71.2 completion rate, breaking the record for both single-season passing yards and single-season completion rate. Brees also threw for 46 touchdowns to 14 interceptions. He led the Saints to a 13-3 record, good enough for the 3rd seed. Yeah, 2011 was wild. Drew Brees and the Saints would have had the best offense in a historic season if it wasn't for Aaron Rodgers and the Packers. Rodgers threw for 800 yards less, 1 touchdown less, but also had 8 less interceptions. Rodgers was more efficient, and he also led the Packers to a 15-1 record, despite having the worst defense in the league.
Yeah, this right here is like, okay. Coin toss. Just, flip a coin. Either person deserves it. I certainly wouldn't blame anyone for voting for Rodgers here. I probably would have voted for Rodgers. I mean, 45-6 is absolutely insane. Losing 1 game. I mean, like what are you going to do? So Rodgers probably did deserve this MVP.
You could make it
even though Brees throws for 5,500 yards.
Argument that Brees could have won the MVP trophy, but the majority of voters knew that considering Aaron Rodgers' situation, he had the more impressive season. 2018 was the very last year Brees would be a finalist for the MVP trophy. 2018 was also the last good chance that Brees had at winning another Super Bowl.
Yep.
This season, Brees was on pace for a monster season, potentially his most efficient season of all time. Going into week,
This also shows like how good Drew Brees is, where you're talking about like, yeah, he could have won it in 2006. Oh, he also could have won it 12 years later. It's like, damn. You know, it's crazy how good he was for so long and just so consistent. You know, like, I mean, it is up there with Brady. Like Manning, even at the end, you know, like Manning at the end, it was like he could barely even hold the football. But like the fact that Brees can, 2006 all the way to 2018.
Week 13, Brees had accumulated 3,135 passing yards, 29 touchdowns, and only 2 interceptions. On pace for almost 4,600 passing yards, 42 touchdowns, and only 3 interceptions.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Brees had been incredible up to that point, so much so that he was a clear-cut favorite to win the MVP. However, after that Week 12 game, Brees' stats completely fell off a cliff, throwing for 3 touchdowns and 3 interceptions in the remaining 4 games he played.
Yeah, that was a bad game right here. Remember exactly where I was. That was I bet that was a. I'm thinking that was a Thursday night football game. Someone double check me. Cowboys, Saints. See if that was Thursday night, because I know where I was when I watched the game, and I would have only been there on Thursday nights.
The Saints still ended with a 13-3 record, but Brees fell out of the MVP favorite spot and would fall to second place for the 4th time in his career, losing to Patrick Mahomes, who without a doubt had the better season. Those were the only 4 times that Drew Brees was a finalist for MVP, and how he lost every single one of them. It really is crazy how Brees never won a single MVP in his career. But not everything is bad for Brees, because even if he didn't win the MVP trophy, he did win 2 things significantly more valuable: the Super Bowl MVP and the Lombardi Trophy.
Yeah, I mean, it's wild. It's crazy how Brees, his career is nuts because he never got the individual accolade. He got the ultimate accolade with, the Super Bowl championship. And over the long haul, he got the individual accolades with like the records. I mean, he owns, if it wasn't for Tom Brady, he would be the passing leader in everything, right? So if it wasn't for Tom Brady, who is the clear-cut number 1, like, let's just compare Brees and Manning. So, yeah, I mean, if you look at this, like, you're looking at Brees played longer, played 20 games more. He has a better completion percentage, way more yards, way more touchdowns, less interceptions, played 20 more games, but less interceptions, higher quarterback rating. But you look at everything else, it's like, okay, well, how the hell was Peyton Manning all pro twice as much as Drew Brees? How was Peyton, a Pro Bowler more than Brees? He was a 5-time MVP to Brees' none. It's just, it's wild. But if you look at this, Brees had the better career. Peyton gets the Super Bowl in Denver again. He could barely even hold on to the football at that time. I mean, anybody, Brock Osweiler could have won the Super Bowl with Denver that year. But so like when you look at this, it's like it's not even really close, unless you put that much stock into that second Super Bowl. But it's wild that one guy, Peyton, can have 5 more MVPs than the other guy, but the other guy have such a clearly better career. It's wild to look at. You could start just throwing all kind of players in there. So if you look at like Favre, Brees, Marino, Rodgers, I mean, Rodgers has a ways to go. Like Rodgers is still playing, obviously, but like Brees has way more yards than everyone else. Like Marino shouldn't even be in this conversation, but way more touchdowns, It's just the only player. But then you look at the individual accolades. You know, Favre's got 3 MVPs. Marino's got an MVP. Rodgers has 4 MVPs. Manning has 5 MVPs. And Brees has none. Brees has the least amount of all pros out of all these guys. Marino had 6. Favre had 6. Rodgers has 5. I don't know. It's just one of those things where you wonder how it happened. You wonder why it happened. It's unique how it did happen. Rodgers is still unknown because his career is he's still going. But if you look at Manning, Favre, Marino, and Brees, I don't think there's any way you can say that Brees is behind those 3 guys as far as like what they did in their career. Who had the better career? But then you look and it's like, well, there's 9 MVPs split between those 4 guys and one has 0. Wild. But it was a good video. I like that video. That was good. That was a good video essay. Sometimes video essays are whatever. That was really well done. It was really well done as far as like, you know, showing the stats. The whole thing was good. That was good. That was a great job. So, you know, the description is, or the link to that video is in the description. Give him a look. Give him a you know, check out his other stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's weird. It's one of those things where it's just like, there's really no rhyme or reason. He definitely should have won it, I think, this year. But even if he has 1 MVP, it's like, you know, Manning still has 5. But in the grand scheme of things, you have to look at him as the second best quarterback to ever live. Second best, you know, the second best career, I think, it has to be Brees. And a lot of people say, like, well, you know, Super Bowl MVP is what really matters. Okay, well, I guess, or Super Bowl championships really matter. So, okay, well, I guess Eli Manning had a better career than, you know, Dan Marino. I guess he's a better quarterback than Dan Marino. So I don't put a lot of Super Bowls are important, but I don't think it's like you should just go down the list of quarterbacks that way. I would rather have Dan Marino than Trent Dilfer, you know. But let me know in the comments below what you think. Interesting video, good stuff. And I will see you in the next video.